not like Rashi Ibn Ezra. The Hanochon Be'enai, says the Ramban, what I think is right is that the Pasuk has a regular habit to write this type of to use this language, Kol Ha'eda, whenever there are complaints. When the Jews complain, it says the whole Eda. For example, it says, Vayovoyu Kol Adas B'nei Yisrael, the entire Jewish people came. It says they came where? They came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. This is back in Shmois, and they complain. It says the Jewish people come along their journeys to Rephidim, and they camp in Rephidim. Again, the whole Adas B'nei Yisrael. What do? They complain. And Amalek comes. What the Torah wants to tell us is, why does it say the whole Ada? Is to tell us that it was everybody voiced a complaint. All in unison, one big complaining. And what perfect example, says the Ramban, is Vatisok kol ha'eda vayitnos kolam, that the whole community lifted up their voices and they let themselves go. They screamed, vayitnos kolam. Once again, kol ha'eda appears. And what happens? What we read in Parshas Korach last week, vayiloinu kol adas b'nei Yisrael mimacharas. The whole Jewish people cry and they complain the next day, and they come and complain to Moshe. That's the reason. So the reason that the Torah says so many times Kol Ha'eda is where it wants to bring out the complaint, the fact that they are complaining. Quite a negative approach, but the Ramban says that's the way the Torah seems to describe it. However, why does it say Kol Ha'eda when they come to Horahar, when they come to their mountain where Aaron is going to pass away? When they now come to Horahar, one of the mountains that was left and not flattened by the Aaron, Lohidia, it's to tell us Shahoyu Kulam behespedoi shel Aaron kadosh Hashem. Here there is a very positive comment, says the Ramban. Why does it say that the whole community came to Horahar? It's to tell us that in unison, there was not a single person who didn't feel the loss of Aaron. Everybody, men, women, etc. As indeed we find, K'moshe Amar vayivku as Aaron kol beis Yisrael, the entire house of Israel. And furthermore, the Ene kol ha'eda, this was in front of the entire community. For that reason, it says it there as well. And then the Ramban goes on to say, as a support for his comment, that if you look at the Medrash in Bamidbar Sinai Rabbah, I've actually seen Shehizkir Beloshen Ha'eda Shlema in the second Pasuk Berahar Bilvad. Why? Because the first one is only because of complaints, as I explained. In other words, when the Torah uses the word Kol Ha'eda or Kol Adas, it's either referring to all together in complaints or all together in making a hesped for Aaron. That's how he understands it. That's how Ramban learns. There's a fascinating, now, these are the kashas that the Ramban had against Rashi. Now, I've looked to the Mefarshim. I didn't see all the Mefarshim, but there's not many that defend Rashi on this point of the Ramban. However, in one of the more recent, if you like, or later commentaries, in the Shem Mishmuel, which is really a Hasidic Sefer, he actually brings a fascinating insight in which he defends Rashi against the attack of the Ramban. Let's have a look. The Shem Mishmuel, of course, was Rabbi Shmuel Bernstein, the son of the Avnei Nezer, the famed Chosachat Shabbat Rebbe, famous for his Avnei Nezer and Iglei Tal. And his son wrote a sefer called Shem Mishmuel, which is, of course, quite a few volumes. And there he says the following. He brings the Rashi, Eida Shlema, now the Mesa Midbar died, and he brings the question of the Ramban. Why does the Torah need to say it afterwards when they come later on to Hor HaHar? According to Rashi, using Rashi's explanation, it doesn't need to tell us again that they're all alive. We already know that they're all alive. They already said that earlier. Explains the Shem Mishmuel as follows. Venira, it appears to me, Dehine shloisha elu Moshe, Aaron, v'Miriam, shenishtalchu yachad l'Yisrael, that was sent to the Jewish people, had the following quality. The Shem Yishmol is going to tell us here that Moshe and Aaron's leadership was something incredible, was something unusual. But more than that, they in themselves were of a nature that didn't fit in the land of Israel. It's a very original explanation. The whole conduct of Moshe fitted into the generation and the psyche of the generation of the desert. It simply did not fit in the psyche of Boi Haaretz, those who came into the land. And the Shem Yishmol says that this is supported back in the Zohar and in several places. Not only that, it's hard to understand this, but this is what he says. For Moshe to come into the land of Israel would have been a descent, not an ascent. Because for Moshe Rabbeinu was on such a madrega, such a level, that he was in the Dor Hamidbar, the Dor of the desert. Ve'al kain, and for that reason, his whole hanhaga, his whole conduct, his leadership was not something that would have fit for those who came to the land. Bevadai kain hoya Miriam. And he says to Shem Yishmol, there's no question that what the Zohar says about Moshe applied equally to Aaron and Miriam, because they were both sent, the three shepherds, as the Chazal called them, the three shepherds that were lost in one time. It didn't fit into the conduct of the generation that came into the land. For this reason, says the Shem Yishmol, there was a reason that God made that they would die in the desert. Even if those reasons that you see, that Chazal tell us, even the reasons that are given in the Chumash, are not the real deep down reason. Miriam passed away, she was old. Couldn't have she gone into the land of Israel? There were certainly women that were older, and they made it. But once again, we see there was a deeper reason, and that is because it was a new generation. They were not fit for the era of Eretz Israel. Aaron and Moshe, don't tell me, says the Shem Yishmol, that the only reason that they didn't get into Israel, Aaron and Moshe, is because of the waters of Meribah. He struck the rock. It cannot be just because of that. Yes, the Torah does say, Yan lo hemantem bi lahaktisheni, because you failed to sanctify me. That is the reason. But it was all orchestrated by Hashem. Inna liyadam, look at the words of the Shem Yishmol. Inna liyadam, he says it was orchestrated from the original by Hashem. Olafize, according to this, yesh lefarish, we can explain, hod hiskira kosov, hoshekva mela mesa midbar. What does the pasuk mean that that those of the desert had died before the death of Miriam? And why does it say it again before Aaron had died? And that was the question of the Ramban. Why express it twice? Why say again this concept, kol ha'eda, that the old generation of the desert had died? Why is that important? Says the Shem Yishmul Chad Taima. It's bringing out the same reason, and that is to tell us, Machmas Shekvar Kolu Mesa Midbar, the people of the desert had died. Now a new generation, a Dor Chadash, a Dor Boi Haaretz, Machmazeh Mesu. That's the real reason that all of them, Aaron and Moshe and Miriam, were not privy to go into the Eretz Yisrael. Umiyusheves Kushas Ramban, and this is how the Ramban's question is answered. There is the same reason. It needed to tell us it's Kol Ha'eda, it's a new generation. The old generation passed away. Miriam therefore passes away. Later on, we get to Harahar, 21 psukim later, and again, the same thing repeats itself. Aaron now passes away. He belongs to that older generation. He belongs to a generation that he was belonging to. Now, we haven't explained why exactly. The Zohar does say this, We have ample support for this for the Shem Yishmael, and he doesn't elaborate on this. But I wanted just to bring this out. This is, by the way, in stark contrast to other Meforshim, including the Orach Chaim HaKodesh, who says, as others do, that the real reason Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't go into Eretz Yisrael is because had he gone into the land of Israel, had the Beis HaMikdash been built under his authority, there would not been able, so to speak, kavayachal, for the Beis HaMikdash to be destroyed by Hashem. And if that would be the case, the anger of God would have been vent, not on just the bricks and stones of the Beis HaMikdash, but chas v'shalom on the goof of Klal Yisrael, chas v'shalom, on the actual body, so to speak, Klal Yisrael. A very different approach for the Shem Yishmael, but nevertheless, the Shem Yishmael uses this answer, uses this approach to defend Rashi against the Ramban's explanation questions. So what happens further? We find Vayeshev ha'am b'Kodesh. This is the next part of the pasuk, by the way. And the people stayed in Kodesh. V'Tomos sham Miriam v'tikaver sham. Miriam dies there and is buried there. V'Tomos sham Miriam dies there. Says Rashi, Af hi bin shikamesa. She also died by the kiss of Hashem. So why doesn't it say Al Pi Hashem? Says Rashi, She'enoi derech kavod shel maila. It would not be respectful to talk about Hashem kissing Miriam. And for that reason, it doesn't say it in that way. By Aaron, it says Al Pi Hashem in Elamase. Now, it's true that God is neither male nor female. But we know that the Torah speaks Koloshen Bnei Adam, and Hashem is always referred to in the masculine form. And because, well, unless we're talking about the Shekhinah, but generally when talking about Yud Kei Vav Kei Al Pi Hashem, it's always in the masculine form. Vayomer, Vayedaber, etc., etc. And for this reason, it doesn't say Neshika by Miriam, but was there Neshika? Absolutely. Was there Neshika? No question. Chazal say that. If you look at the Guraria says, what does Rashi need to say this for? What's he trying to tell us here? And the Guraria tells us that Rashi is bothered by the following question. Why do we need to have the word sham? Let's look back at the pasuk. We have the words Vayeshev ha'am b'Kodesh, V'Tomos sham Miriam. Miriam died there. V'tikaver sham, and she was buried there. Why do we need the word sham repeated? Explains the Guraria Bola Taretz, Rashi comes to answer. It just needed to say, and Miriam died, and she was buried there. The reason that it says Sham twice is to tell us Exera Shava from Aaron, a like expression. Just like it says by Aaron the word Sham, the Aaron Meis ben Shika, and we know that Aaron died by the kiss of Hashem, as it says Al Pi Hashem. So also with Miriam, it was also Sham Al Pi Hashem. Therefore, the extra word Sham there tells us there. That's how the Gurari explains what bothered Rashi and why Rashi sees fit to bring up this whole topic of Bin Shika Mesa. And if you look in the brackets, so does the Ram, the Rabbi Leor Mizrahi, seems to learn also like Gurari as well. A very different approach was taken by the Alshech. And he also has a very different approach to why the Torah needs to say Kol Ha'eda, the entire community. Now, we've learned before the way Rashi learns, the way the Ramban learns, and how the Shem Yishmael explains it. The Alshich has a fascinating insight into why does it say Kol Ha'eda, the whole community. Shehu Miyutar seems to be extra. When it says she was buried there, that also seems to be extra. Of course she was buried there. If she died there, then she's going to be buried there. Furthermore, it says, there was no water for the Ada. Again, the word Ada appears. And that seems to be extra. Why didn't it just say, there was not water? Obviously, we mean there was no water for the people. That's why they complained. Furthermore, says the Alshich, and I must tell you that I've only taken a tiny bit of the Alshich. He is very long, and I've only taken what I thought was relevant to our discussion here. Kosher ma'oid, it is very hard to understand. Why does Hashem bring the Jewish people to such a state of thirst? Ad kotze b'chayim. They didn't want to live anymore. They felt like suicide. They felt like dying. And as Rashi tells us, that to die by thirst, chas v'shalom, is worse even than dying by famine. Says the Alshich HaKodesh, why? Why did God bring them to that state? If it's simply to tell us that the Jewish people should know, you should know that the only reason you've got water is because of Miriam, really? So take away the water for a few minutes. Take away the water for an hour or two. Ki al kain siluka al bisiluka, when she departed, nistalik im kain no sheachas oshtaim. Let the water stop for an hour or two, and then come back in the schus of Moshe. As indeed, both came back in this chusai. We know that the clouds of glory came back after Aaron died. It came back for Moshe, and so did the well. Says the Alshich HaKodesh, why is God doing this to the people? Keeping them in thirst for such a long time. So they take it away for a little bit to tell people, oh, it stopped. Right, we know it's because of Miriam. And here the Alshich explains the following. He brings a few comments before that, but then he says, Kiven oid kiven bomer al Ada. Why does it say la Ada? And that's to tell us as follows. What we notice in the story of Miriam passing is that we don't see a fuss made over her. There is no crying. There is no hasped. We don't find the people coming and getting involved. And this was not something in secret. This was not Miriam going up to a mountain that we read later on about that happened to Aaron. This is happening in Kadesh, right in the middle of the Jewish people. What happened to the Yidden? Where were they? The here ben that is, Yodana we know Kimilas Ha'am Mashmoy al Hamoinam. The expression Ha'am refers to the ordinary populace. But when it says Ha'eda, it doesn't just mean the people. It means everyone. The Adas Yisrael, the entire community. And what is the Torah telling us by saying La'eda when it says the word Ada? And that is as follows. V'hu ki lo yikshe. What could be asked is, Alavoina shalei taplu b'kvuras Miriam, ha'isazos lahem. If this was the reason that the Jewish people are not having water is not just to tell us that the schus of the war of Miriam brought them the water, but it's because they did not take care of the burial of Miriam. Where were the throngs of people that should have come? Well, if that is the case, im kain, if so, lama loka harashumim ashahoyim v'taplen b'Moshe v'Aaron. According to the Alshich HaKodesh, he says there were people who did come with Moshe and Aaron, and there was not a total neglect. For this reason, the Torah wants to tell us, Kihein ze haklal Torah, there is a rule in the Torah, that the good suffer with the bad. Habilti tovim gormim latovim sheyilku gamheim. Asher leholchu hanikroim b'shemam. The people that didn't go are called the people. Ha'am. Ha'am is a very low level. Often when the Jewish people are not doing the right thing, they are called Ha'am. Ka'omer, that's why it says, Va'yeshev ha'am b'Kodesh. The people stayed in the Kodesh. Who were these people? This was the throngs of Jewish people who did not come and show and pay their respects to Miriam, but who were struck because of them, the entire community. Everyone suffered because of the They all got it in. They were all in for it. For this reason, says the Alshich HaKodesh, why does it say Lahoyomayim La'eda? This was one of his questions. Why does it say, and there was no water for the community? It means the entire community. The word Ada is specially used there to tell us that the good suffered with the non-good. The that came to Kodesh were responsible for the entire Ada to not have water, Lahoyomayim La'eda. With this, the Alshich has explained, therefore, answers to his questions as to why Hashem imposed such a severe punishment, if you like, that the people suffered not having water. It also explains why it needs to say Vatikover Sham, she was buried there, to tell us that even though she was buried amongst the Jewish people, nevertheless they suffered, and not just the but Kol Ha'eda. Now the Alshich HaKodesh lived in the 1500s and made Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael later on. The Orach Chaim HaKodesh similarly made Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael in the last 2 years of his life. We have a place even today near the Kosel where apparently he had his shul and gave shiurim. But he was something like 200 years after or 150 years after the Alshich HaKodesh. And he takes a very, very different approach, very different to the Alshich HaKodesh as to what happened here with Miriam passing and and what was the reaction of the Jewish people. A much more positive view, a very different view. Says the Orach Chaim HaKodesh, why does it say Vayavoyu b'nei Yisrael kol ha'eda? The whole community came. He is of the opinion, the Orach Chaim HaKodesh is of the opinion, Kulon nikroim b'shem Yisrael b'geder yesharim v'tzadikim. When we use the word Eda, it means they were all good. They came entirely. And this fits in with Chazal who say, Kol ha'eda, Eda hashlema, the entire community. Says the Orach Chaim HaKodesh, not just the entire people in numbers, not just like Rashi says, these were the people who were selected to live. They were now l'chaim kol chamayim. No, they were complete in the way they conducted themselves as well. Now, he admits that Chazal learned that the Eda means that they were all alive and they were all going to survive. V'ayin ponim laTorah, but we know that there are 70 ways to interpret the Torah, and therefore I wish to offer, says the Orach Chaim HaKodesh, I wish to offer a different explanation, and that is as follows. Number one, Lefi she'omer b'samach ma'aseh Meribah. We're soon going to learn about the story of the waters of Meribah that follows right after the passing of Miriam. And Chazal say that Moshe Rabbeinu was punished because of this event. Al Yodam, through them. How does he get punished? Because he says, Shimu no hamoirim, listen to me, you rebellious people. Because this story is about to unfold, for that reason, says the Orach Chaim HaKodesh, Hikdim lahodiyacha, the Torah first needs to tell us that the Eda were tzaddikim, that the people were good. The people did not deserve to be called moirim. They did not deserve to be called rebellious peoples. Why? Because they are Eda. They are complete and they are wholesome. And for this reason, according to the Orach Chaim HaKodesh, the usage of the word Eda here is introducing what went wrong at Mei Meribah. It's as if to say, Hashem is talking as if to say, these are the Eda. These are the pure flock of the Jewish people. How could you call them Moirim? They're thirsty. They don't have water. They cannot be blamed for getting exasperated. You had no right to call them Moirim. And Hashem says, that's it. Now we know there's a big dispute as to what was the problem there in Mei Meribah. But the Orach Chaim HaKodesh is learning that it seems to be the Moirim part, according to this. That's first explanation. Second, why does it say Kol Ha'eda, the entire Eda? It's to tell us the greatness of Miriam, Alei Shalom. Why? The whole Eda were tzaddikim. The entire community were tzaddikim. And yet, the zchus of the entire community did not stand for them to allow them to drink water and have a flourishing and a flowing well because Miriam passed away. According to the Orach Chaim HaKodesh, very, very different from the Alshich. He says, on the contrary, why was the well stopped? Which is a rather harsh thing. It stopped to tell us the greatness of Miriam. How do the people see how great they were, how great she was, is despite the fact that it was Kol Ha'eda, the entire Eda coming now to this place, in the place of Kodesh. Nevertheless, Lahoya Maim La'eda, there is still no water for the Eda because of the greatness of Miriam. Third explanation, why does it need to say the Eda, the entire Eda? Okay. Al pi divrei Zal she'omra. Chazal say, and this is very different to the first two explanations. Chazal say that the Yidden did not go ligmal chesed Miriam. They did not pay their respects to Miriam when she passed away. Uchshenikalu al Moshe v'Aaron, when they now come and gather against Moshe and Aaron, or not against, when they come towards Moshe and Aaron, thousands and thousands of Yidden approaching Moshe and Aaron, what does Aaron think? Well, his natural instinct was to think, wow, this is amazing. They're coming now to pay respects to Miriam. Shebo ligmal chesed Miriam. What did they really come for? Well, the Torah tells us what they came for. They're coming to do nothing more than complain and say, we want water. We don't want to die here in the desert. Why have you brought us out here? As Rashi says, the death of thirst is worse than a death of famine. As Chazal say. Now, you might think, says the Arachaim, you might think and suspect, well, if that's the case, what a rotten bunch of people. The greatest woman that they had passes away. All they can do is complain. And you might think, maybe they're not kosher, maybe they're not proper. Says the Arachaim, for that reason the Torah needs to say, despite all of that, look, they didn't pay respect with this great prophetess, with Miriam. For therefore, says the Arachaim HaKodesh, in order to allay any such suspicion, the Torah first tells you, no, the entire Jewish people are tzaddikim. Asher b'shem Yisrael yiskanu, they are called Yisrael. We know that the term Yisrael is a term of shvach. B'tam shelegomu chesed, why didn't they pay respects to Miriam? Amar HaKosav v'samuch, the Torah tells us why. V'Tomas sham Miriam v'tikaver sham, and Miriam died there, and she was buried there. Say the Gemara in Moed Katan the Zelashonim about Thomas, she died. Why does it say she died there and she was buried there? The Gemara learns in Moed Katan to tell us Samuch lemisa kavura, right next to the bed, right after the death, mamish after the death, kavura, they buried her. It was like instant. Ulatam zeh lo higishu love l'gmal chesed. Says the Rechaim, if it was for this reason, the Jewish people didn't even have a chance to go Mal Chesed. By the time they found out about it, they were already so distressed about the thirst that was facing them. Millions of Jews in the desert, no water for children, for men, for women. That immediately took over the knowledge or the grief that came with Miriam. In other words, there was not even a time to grieve for Miriam. It was so quick. It happened so fast. But Thomas from Miriam, but Sham, that before they knew it, all of a sudden they've got babies in the tent screaming and children asking and parents asking, where's water? Where's water? And they come to Moshe and Aaron thinks, of course, they're coming to pay respect. But no, they didn't even have time to even mentally digest the passing of Miriam. And for that reason it says, and there was no water. Why does it say that? As if to explain, don't judge the Jews unfairly. They were Ada, they were still good people, and they couldn't help it. That's how he explains it. Continues the Rechaim HaKodesh. Why does it say again Sham? Thomas Sham, and she died there. Vatikaver Sham, and she was buried there. Now Chazal explained, as we just said in Moed Katan, Shaloi Kvuha, they didn't stop, they did it immediately. And this drasha is learned from the words Vatikaver Sham. She died, she was buried, it was like instantly, very fast. But I'd like to tell you another reason, says the Rechaim HaKodesh, just to tell you how great this woman was. Venira, and it appears, Kilatzad Shehizkir Misa, once it says, and Miriam died, Choshal Kvedat Tzedekes. The Torah immediately wants to bring out the greatness, the honor of this righteous woman. Chazal, after all, say in the Gemara Brachas, Tzadikim in their Misa are called Chaim, are called living. Lozeh, for that reason, Diktek Loimer Sham needed to say Sham there. Pirush Sham, what does it mean there? There she died. Only there. V'lo nisharo beinayam, only in front of their eyes she wasn't there. but she was in another place, nestled between the tzaddikim. The tzaddikim are before Hashem, in the eyes of Hashem, like precious jewels that are resting in a beautiful box. And whenever Hashem wants one of them, he takes them out, puts them in a tachshit metachshitov, and wants to and cannot have enough of watching and gazing and enjoying the pleasure of the diamonds. And therefore, according to the Racham HaKodesh, the word Sham is repeated only there she was buried. But she is alive and in front of Hashem and like a gem before the Hashem in that world. Fine. Based on what we've just said, I'd like to also bring it down to a halacha. Now I'm going to skip going down further down the page, and we're going to look and see that there is a halacha in Shulchan Aruch from all of this. If we look down in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Kuf Tzadik Ches, he says the following halacha that comes from this story. Im echad talmid chacham ve'echad am haaretz. If there is two people to be buried, a talmid chacham and am haaretz, we always take out the talmid chacham first. Even if the am haaretz died first, we take out the talmid chacham first. And this is a respect for the talmid chacham. Ish ve'isha, if there is a man and a woman to be buried, meitzin es isha tchila, always take care of the woman first, even if the man died first. How do we know that? It's a Shulchan Aruch halacha that we learn from this week's Parsha. But Thomas Sham Miriam. Miriam died there, Batikover Sham, and she was buried there. Samuch lemisa kvura. The Torah tells us that immediately after death, she was buried. Why does the Torah mention it only here by Miriam? It's to tell us that the urgency of burying straight after death applies to a woman much more than a man, and therefore if you have a choice between the two, the woman would get buried first, even if the man died first. It's interesting halacha that comes out from this pasuk. We don't normally paskin from a pasuk, but the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch does bring this asmachta from the story of Miriam. Let's now come back to the story of Miriam, passing of Miriam, and I want to address a few questions about something unique that we find with Miriam that we don't find with Moshe and Aaron, and perhaps with other people as well. And we're going to spend a bit of time now looking at it through a sefer called Oznaim LaTorah, which was authored by Reb Zalman Sorotskin, known as the Lutzker Rav, made Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, and he passed away in 1966, Tafshin Chavav, and the day he passed away was the 9th day of Tammuz, which, if you look at your calendar, you'll see that's tonight. So I thought how appropriate to end off to talk about the issues as raised by the Oznaim LaTorah. And he has a fascinating way of a fascinating approach to some questions that I haven't dealt with by others. Okay. One thing that's interesting is we find that when Miriam passes away, it mentions the month only, Rak HaChodesh. As we saw right up there, it says, Thomas Sham Miriam, what does it say there? Right in the top in the beginning, it says, B'chodesh HaRishon, in the first month. That's, of course, the month of Nisan. Doesn't say anything about a day. It just says the month, the first month. Interesting. When it talks about Aaron passing away, it tells us everything. It tells us the day, it tells us the month, it tells us the year. When it comes to Moshe, we find nothing. There is nothing in the Torah that tells us about not the day, not the month, not the year. Nothing. What is the pshat? Why? Well, one of the explanations as Oznaim LaTorah mentions is as follows. He says it fits into the story. When we talk about Moshe Rabbeinu, what do we know about Moshe Rabbeinu? We don't know where he's buried. The Torah keeps it a secret. In the same way that the Torah does not tell us anywhere, it keeps as a hiding, it's hidden from us where he's buried, and no one knows where he's buried. Even though the Torah gives all the simonim, all the signs, it's really, though, a mystical way. It's really mystical because no one's ever found it. In the same way, the Torah, if you like, camouflages, or the Torah hides the day of his Peturah as well. It doesn't tell us. And there is also talk about this, about, of course, we know the whole story of Purim is associated with this, that the only way we know how he passed away is because we know when he was, we know when he was born, we know he passed away. The Gemara makes a whole cheshbon of how we know he passed away as Zayin Adar. But the Torah keeps it a secret, and the Znaim the Torah maintains it's consistent with the secrecy of the burial place of Moshe not being known. When it comes to Miriam, we do find the month given. Why do we find the month given? And that is in order to tell us that the Meraglim passed away, as we know, in the month. The Meraglim, as we know, died in Tisha B'Av. They came back with their horrible story, and Hashem said, "You cried for nothing. You'll have something to cry about," etc., etc. But the Meraglim were dealt with instantly, and they died on the spot, if you like, on Tisha B'Av. And that took place in the month of Av, the 5th month. When we find Miriam passing away in this week's Parsha, in such a close proximity to the story of the spies, we only had Shlach just coming now before us. Therefore, the Torah needs to tell us Miriam's passing had absolutely nothing to do with the generation of the spies, with the generation that refused to go into the land of Israel. And therefore, the Torah simply needs to say, B'chodesh HaRishon, nothing more. Doesn't need to say even the day. We know it's Chodesh HaRishon, the month of Nisan, that's it. Of course, Gemara tells us, Kabbalah, we know that it was on the 10th of Nisan, Yud Nisan, but the Torah needs only to tell us Chodesh Nisan, and it's enough to disassociate her passing with the Meraglim and those others who passed away in the month of the Av, which is the 5th month. When we come to Aaron, however, when did Aaron pass away? Aaron passed away on the 5th month, B'chodesh HaChamishi, on the month of Av. And when on that month of Av? On Rosh Chodesh. Here says Oznaim LaTorah, the Torah needs to tell us that although this is 38 years later, after the story of the spies, it needs to still tell us that Aaron passed away on the month of Av. It was the 5th month, but it was Rosh Chodesh Av. It was the first day of the month. In order to tell us that although both the Meraglim in that generation, or some of that generation, died in the month of Av, and for years after, 15,000 would die every month, every year after year on Tisha B'Av, the month of Av, even though, and Aaron also passed away of Av, don't chas v'sholom associate Aaron's passing with that generation. No, he was not only the first, he was the 5th month, yes, Chodesh Av, but Rosh Chodesh Av. For that reason, the Torah needs to say it and tell us in the full detail, not just the month, but also the date. This is one explanation. There are other explanations as to why Aaron's particularly needed to be specified. I don't know if we'll have time. I will just say one other reason that's brought down, and that is that Aaron was the Kohen Gadol. His passing away was not just a matter of knowing a yahrzeit. It was not just a matter of knowing what day to say Kaddish on. It's not just a matter to know when did the first Kohen pass away. It's more than that. Aaron's passing away because he was a Kohen Gadol allowed any person who had killed someone by accident to go out of the Orei Miklat, to leave the city of refuge. And in case you think that the Orei Miklat did not apply until they got into Israel, there was a sort of an Orei Miklat that would apply even when there was traveling in the camp. There was if you like, a refuge, not cities, but there was a place that they went to as well. And some of the Parshas actually say that because his passing was so important to know for Klal Yisrael, not just the day and not just the month and the year, but even the time that he passed away, although the Torah doesn't say it, it's because a halachic implication is that if a person was judged by the Beis Din that he had killed someone by accident, he would have to go and to the Orei Miklat, and he was in Orei Miklat already. He would then be released after Aaron's passing away. However, we understand that. That's a bit difficult to understand, but that's how some of them explain. Let's have a look, however, at the next questions. Why does it say Shom twice? A question that's been asked by a number of them Farshim. Chazal asked it in the Moed Katan. Al-Shich HaKodesh asked it. The Aracham asked it. And the second question, why don't we find a cry for the passing of Miriam. Something already that we've dealt with, or the Arachaim HaKadosh has dealt with. Let's have a look at it in the eyes of the Znaim Torah and see what he offers for this. Explains Reb Zalman the following. He says, there were three shepherds that the Jewish people had. Gimel Roim Hoya Yisrael. Who were the three shepherds? There was Miriam, there was Aaron, there was Moshe. Aaron's passing in this week's Parsha was very different to the others in the sense that no one saw it. No one was there. The only people who were up on that mountain were Moshe and Elazar. And Elazar was zeicher to see his son be decked. Aaron was honored to see his son be decked in the glory of the clothes of the Kohen Gadol, something that Moshe envied, but no one else was there. So much so that when they came down from the mountain, and the Jewish people said, "What happened to Aaron? Where's Aaron?" And they said, "Aaron's not here. He's gone. He's mace. He's nifter." They didn't believe it. And we read in this week's, in today's Rashi, in fact, and today in Yom Shlishi, we read how Moshe Rabbeinu begged Hashem, "Give me a sign. Tell what can I show the Jewish people?" And then there was his beer, there was his coffin floating in the air, etc., etc. But they saw, although they were not privy to be at the passing of Aaron, it was a very, very private ceremony in a mountain cave, in a bed there, with a candle there, very, very serene and totally, totally private. What was public was the burial place of Aaron. Everyone knew the burial spot. Hoyer, Hahar, and they knew where it was. It never says that the Jewish people could not see the Kvur of Aaron or did not know the burial place of Aaron. They knew that. They knew the burial place of Aaron. Moshe and Elazar actually could show the people, this is the place where, this is the cave that he's buried at, so they could know the place where he's buried. In other words, they had closure. What was the closure? They finally were privy to see the coffin in the air. The angels showed them the whole story. And they could see the actual place that he was buried. Fine. Makom Kavurasa Yadu Alahem. With Moshe Rabbeinu, it was exactly the opposite. Everyone saw. He passed away. Moshe Rabbeinu said goodbye to everybody. There was closure in that sense. The Zoysa Bracha Sheberach Moshe, according to some of Vayelech Moshe, according to some of Farshim, what does Vayelech mean? And he went. Where did he go? He went to say goodbye to everybody. There was closure. They saw. They realized that he passed away. There was not a question about that. They were a bit upset. The Medrash says they tried to stop it, Kibbayachal, so to speak. But all right, but they had closure. What they didn't have closure was that they didn't know where he was buried. The Lo Yoda Ishis Kavurasa, no man ever knew his Kavura. The top of the mountain they looked, the bottom of the mountain they looked, no one could ever see it. Fine. But there was always something that they had closure for. When it comes to Miriam, it was different. With Miriam, their sister, it says, "Vat Thomas Sham Miriam." It says Miriam died there. Where did she die? Besoich Amma, in the middle of her people. Vatikaver Sham, and she was buried there. She was buried there means in the place that was Yodua Lakoil, a place that everybody knew. Her missa, her passing was not hidden at all. Not by Aaron, not like by Aaron, and not the place of the Kavura by Moshe. And if that is the case, it is possible that for this reason, there was a cry on the passing of Aaron. There was a cry on the passing of Moshe, but not on Miriam, in whose chus, after all, they had the water in the desert. And in Egypt, she was the woman who played such a vital role in saving the children from the Egyptians. But it never says that they cried for her in the same way that there was a 30-day period of mourning for Moshe and there were many, many days of crying for Aaron, etc., etc. But there was, if you like, at least they had closure. So Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam all lived beyond the age of 120. But what happened with the passing of Aaron was, because no one was even there by the Yetzirah Neshama, there was a torrent of tears among the Jewish people. All of a sudden, he's gone. There's no closure. 3 go up, 2 come down. Such a misa bilti regila, as he calls it, such an unusual death, shocked the Jewish nation. And the people cried an enormous cry. Each one said, I would have wanted to say goodbye to the Kohen Gadol, to the one who was the Malach Elokim, etc., etc. And so indeed it says, Vayivku, and they cried for Aaron 30 days. When Moshe Rabbeinu, yes, it's true, they saw the passage, they were there. Moshe Rabbeinu was taken away from them, and he gave them a Birkas Preda. They did have closure in that sense, but when they made all the preparation and they thought they could participate in the Levaya, there was no Levaya that they could participate in. And Hashem buried himself with such an unusual burial as well. There was a torrent of tears as well. They thought maybe Hashem has made it that we are not Kedai, we are not fit enough to see and to be there to pay our respects at his actual passing, at his Levaya. So, Min HaShamayim, they thought, they started to cry. Vayivkus b'nei Sol ba'arvos Moav, it says they cried for Moshe in Arvos Moav, in the plains of Moab. It does not say that they cried for him at his grave, like most people do. They cry at a grave because there was no grave that they could cry. They didn't know where it was. With Miriam, however, she died and was buried kederech kol haaretz, in the way of people. And therefore, because of that, the people felt satisfied that they were able to be with her beforehand. They were able to be at her Levaya, and for this reason, we find that there was not this enormous cry as there was beforehand. Very different to all the other commentators before. With that, he perhaps explains a different interpretation on what it means by V'lo hoya mayim la'eda, and there was no water for the community. Literally translated, it means, the simple pshat, there was no water. There was no water because of the bear of Miriam that had run dry now because she had gone. But in a deeper sense, says Osman Torah, there was no water there was no water in the eyes of the tears of the Bnei Israel. They didn't shed the same tears that they had before. It's a very as they were going to do for Aaron and for Moshe. The Chazal tell us that it was in the schus of three great people that we had three great gifts. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name that there were three panosim tovim, three fantastic leaders that the Jewish people had, or shepherds, Moshe and Aaron and Miriam, and we got three gifts because of them: the be'er, the onan, and the man, the well, the cloud, and the man. The be'er in the schus of Miriam, the amadan in the schus of Aaron, and the man, of course, came the schus of Moshe Rabbeinu. When Miriam passed away, the bear stopped, as it says, Vatamas Miriam, and then it says, La'ayamim la'eda. But it came back afterwards in the schus of Aaron and Moshe. Aaron passed away, the clouds left, and it came because of the schus of Moshe. The Petach Enai, one of the great Sephardic scholars, explains, Bazer Parashti Ani Atzair, I, the young one, explained the following song that we will read in this week's Parsha. Ali Be'er Enullah. Ali Be'er Enullah means, rise up, O well, and give thanks to her. Rashi explains, in today's Chumash, that the Jewish people were singing a song, bring up, show us the remains of our attackers, of our would-be attackers, of the terrorists who were planning to throw missiles from the mountains above. Ali Be'er, rise up, O well, show us what you have there. The greatness of the miracles that Hashem had performed. But perhaps law means Lashon Nekeva, a remez to Miriam. Ali Be'er Enullah answered to Miriam, because it was, after all, give thanks to Miriam. It was Miriam in whose schus the well came. Be'er Chafaru Sarim, this is the well that was dug by the princes, meaning that after Miriam passed away, there were two princes, Moshe and Aaron, in whose schus they had the well again. Chafaru Sorim. It was, if you like, dug again by the Sorim, by Moshe and Aaron. But after Aaron passed away, and now there was only Moshe left, it was still Bimchokek, Bimishanesom, Bimichokek Moshe Rabbeinu Avashon. Bizchusa Levad Haya Be'er. Now the well was only in the schus of Moshe, the last one standing. It it says that twice the word be'er. Once, the first time be'er chafaru asarim, the chafaru asarim, the bear that was dug by that's in the schus of Miriam. And after Miriam, again the word bear appears because it came in the schus of Moshe and Aaron. Pamacheres, again it came after Aaron Kohen. Lo nistal kischus Moshe alim, the power of Moshe was great, and it remained in his schus levadoi, Moshe Rabbeinu. We'll finish off by saying that even to this day, it brought down in Shulchan Aruch that the well of Miriam travels through all the streams of the world, everywhere. And it says that he or she who is able to be zoicha to drink from the waters of Miriam will have a refuah, will have a healing. And there are people, I think even in Melbourne, there are people that have wells, private wells dug, because it says that the rivers of the wells of Miriam flows into all the places, Kol ha'olam kulai, and people who are zeicha to drink from the waters. And usually it says on Motzei Shabbos this happens. It's a schus for refuah for everybody. Maybe in the schus of Miriam and Neviah, in the schus of all the tzaddikim, Eibush should grant that everybody that needs a refuah shleima should have the refuah shleima, and those who are well should stay well and gesund and stark, and there should be shalom al Yisrael.